children are themselves victims of domestic abuse. So if they are within the household and abusive behaviours are happening, then they are victims. The abuse doesn't have to be directed at them, and that's part of a fairly recent legislation from 21. Perpetrators will use children, and they will do it overtly. So children are subjected to physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, or they will do it again covertly, which is part of this coercive control. That manipulating, that gaslighting. They have parental responsibility. They may never have exercised that parental responsibility before, but suddenly they are extremely involved. They will absolutely resist children being moved schools or being assessed for SEN and neurodiversity. That's a common one too. They really push back because they know that once a relationship is over, they can use children to impact that victim continuously. If it's within the relationship, it probably is slightly more of an overt thing because the child is within the household. So it could be that they shout at them and things like that as well. So looking at the dynamic for a child is really important. However the abuse is kind of exerted, the children are victims of it. And we have to hold that really at the centre of what we're doing. We also have to think about the risk involved with children as well. Children become victims, that they can be killed by family members, they can be caught up to that extent. So we always have that in the back of our mind when we safety plan as well around children. Obviously, we have a duty of care to do that. So, and I think what's really important to remember is the way we think about domestic abuse is not that every type of abuse is separate. If you can imagine everything on one line as a scale, wherever the person you're talking to sits on that scale, everything is a potential. So I had a victim say to me this morning, he does this, that, and the other, but he would never hurt the children. And I said to her, actually, every victim of domestic abuse at some point would be on the scale where they would be thinking, oh yeah, all of this has happened, but that wouldn't. For some people it does, and we have to be prepared for that, whoever we're talking to. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of kind of going back to the like covert abuse that can happen while still in, thinking about that monitoring and tracking again, children can be often used for monitoring and tracking. So what's mummy been doing today? Who is mummy speaking to? When you went out, did you see anyone? All of those kind of things that actually on the surface we might not consider to be, what parent doesn't want to know what their child's been up to in the day? That's normal, that's fine. But in a case of coercive control, it's more than that. And actually, quite often we'll have people say, well, I don't think they were really witness to much, and they were never harmed or anything like that. But children are more switched on than we think, and we should give them more credit for what they are aware of, when we think that they're not. And a child will learn pretty quick because of survival, what they need to do in order to keep them safe, to keep the other parent safe who is at risk of harm. I'm aware I just used that term, what's mummy been up to today? And of course, this can happen either way. Either parent could be coercively controlling here. So it's just starting to think about all of those other ways that actually I think a lot of the behaviours that we talk about when it comes to coercive control, if sort of on an isolated sense on their own, and without sort of that overarching sense of needing power and control, a lot of these behaviours independently are okay and can sometimes be part of a normal household, normal family relationship, wanting to know what someone's been up to and taking an interest in what they've been up to, sort of sharing that intimacy, kind of going back to that, sexual abuse side of things. Some of these things can be
it's like a grey area.
It can be really hard, and that's when people find it really, really tricky in sort of unpicking it, is because actually what is okay to do, and what isn't okay. And I think the point here is the person causing harm, what their intention is here. Is it to find out about everybody's day and see what everyone's been up to, or is it going to have consequences if the parent and child has done something that day that the other parent isn't happy with? What are the consequences going to be for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one is, it's just popped up. Oh my God.
Stalking.
Stalking. So we're not going to cover this in too much detail because actually there's another webinar for this. We'll show you a QR code at the end so that you can find out more about that. But I think just because we're time conscious today and there's a lot to cover, we're going to skip that one a little bit today.
Yeah, absolutely. But we would definitely encourage you to check out that stalking webinar. It's actually going to be next week, again, as part of the 16 days of action, because stalking, again, is something that really gets overlooked and dismissed and minimised. And actually, stalking, again, is one of the high risk factors for domestic homicide. So really, really well worth checking that webinar out. But we certainly don't want to take away from that today. Okay, emotional abuse. Okay, so we're thinking about things here like mood swings, name calling, humiliation. So with the mood swings, of course, we're all human. We're not all happy all the time. But again, when we're thinking about somebody who... Oh, I can hear some background noise. Is everybody muted? What we're thinking about here is when somebody else's mood is negatively impacting on the rest of the home, and actually is sort of being transferred over to the rest of the home as being someone else's fault, when actually we all need to be sort of responsible of our own emotions. And if we're having a bad day, we can own that and we can feel that. But what we're thinking about here when it comes to emotional abuse is that person's bad day will then be somebody else's fault.
Yeah. And this is all really normalized for victims. So as professionals and practitioners, it's about being curious and thinking about the fact that, is this somebody struggling and they're just, not able to keep their emotions in check? Or is this behavior happening for a reason? Is this behavior playing out in the family home because it causes that state of survival for the victim and uncertainty and unpredictability and all of those other things that then allows one person over the other to have some kind of dominance? And I think that's the thing, isn't it? We need to always remain curious as to what the impact of these behaviours, which can seem, like Jess has said, fairly mundane, fairly normal and accepted, like a tracking device on a phone because I just want to know you're safe.
Yeah.
Or is it because actually I want to know where you are? That's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And things like humiliation. So when you're out and about, does your partner or family member constantly do things to put you down and try and humiliate you in front of other people? So are you the butt of the jokes, really? And actually this really does all play out when we're thinking about bringing that kind of professional curiosity to things, and even just in conversations with our own family and friends and people around us, we can really hear this stuff come out in people's language. Is somebody always taking responsibility for everything and things that they shouldn't be taking responsibility for? So often we can hear things come out, people say things and we just sort of brush it off and we go, oh, I'm sure they were just having a bad day, like I'm sure it's fine, don't worry about it. But actually, if we've got somebody coming to us and saying, oh well, they were really angry last night because you know what I'm like, I'm really annoying and I do this and I do that. Actually really taking note of those kind of things and actually staying with that and being like, hang on a minute, what do you mean? That you're not annoying, or kind of reassuring somebody, because we hear it so often, don't we, that a victim in this kind of scenario will quite often take full responsibility for everything, even the things that aren't theirs to hold on to.
Yeah, and their mental health often can be poor as well. So they will think, oh, I am the crazy one, I am the unstable one, it is my fault, or it is my responsibility in some way. So
well, if you think about what we've got on this screen already, if we were to start putting all of these things together, they're not isolated incidents here. If we're thinking about somebody living in coercive control, probably they're going to be experiencing all of these already so far. And like Sophie said earlier on, this kind of behavior is eroding. It happens over time. You don't just meet somebody, you go on a first date with them and they go, oh, you're a bit, well, maybe you do, but you wouldn't go out with them again. That's my point, is it's always really lovely in the beginning, and typically, you know, quite often what we hear is it's everything that somebody wanted, they found in this person, and they thought that they had found their fairy tale happily ever after. And over time, things come in, you know, that kind of invasion of privacy. So you just don't really have that sense of identity and a sense of self anymore. You are part of a team, essentially, that you and somebody else have become one person. So you lose that sense of self. You know, then we've got things like the loyalty code. So typically you might have gone to a friend before this relationship to kind of get that kind of life advice from, and actually now you've been pitted against them, so you don't have that relationship anymore. You know, that gaslighting behavior of every time you have challenged something and think, oh, this doesn't feel right, that's shut down. So your basic intuition has been blocked and shut down. You know, all of those kind of things, this all builds and forms part of this emotional abuse, that eventually, you know, you wouldn't question the emotional abuse at this point, because you would think that you deserve it.
Yeah,
another key one within this category is withdrawal of intimacy and affection. So quite often what we might be thinking of, typically, if we think about an abusive relationship, is sort of that kind of love bombing and that bombarding of love and affection, and actually that can be a really useful tool, and certainly does happen in order to keep somebody in a relationship. But the withdrawal of intimacy and affection can also be really key here, because what happens is, on the base level, there isn't anything. But then if the victim in this scenario does or says something or wears something or goes somewhere that the person causing harm is happy with, they could then reinstate that love and affection and intimacy as a reward for any kind of compliance or for staying in the relationship. So that can also be quite common. And again, can be really, really difficult for somebody living in this, because they might think that if their partner isn't really giving them any kind of love and intimacy and affection, then they can't be abusive, because they don't necessarily, like, they're not caring about them. But certainly there is sort of that hidden motive there of, they may know that what you are seeking from in this relationship is intimacy and affection, and so they know then if they give that to you, then that is everything that you want, and will definitely help them stay in control. We should have said at the beginning the kind of safety message around looking after yourself, and it just came to me as I was talking then, that of course we've got an awful lot of people on this call, and statistically there will be domestic abuse, there will be coercive control in this room. So I am hoping that you are all looking after yourself, and please do kind of take breaks or do anything that you need to. I apologise that we didn't say that at the beginning. We were just so keen to get going and get started, and this is our everyday for us. So we can get a bit blind to the impact of it from time to time. So I do apologise.
We were quite worried about squeezing all of this into an hour.
Yeah,
we could talk about it forever.
We could. We do talk about this forever. If you were to be a fly on the wall of our office, yeah. So yeah, there can be an awful lot that kind of goes into emotional abuse as well. This is all very brief and a whistle-stop tour. Of course it is. What we wanted to do was sort of pick out some of the like more niche things that maybe we don't necessarily hear about too often, or things that don't really get talked about too much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so I think what's important to remember here as well is that victims will have their own vulnerabilities, like we all have. So whether they've come from a difficult childhood, or they've got low self-esteem, maybe they've had a couple of difficult relationships in the past, that kind of scenario, if they have a sort of weakness, actually it's very normal, but if the perpetrator sees that as some kind of weakness, that will be something that will be exploited. So blackmail, again, is a bit of a kind of vast topic, depending on the situation, depending on those vulnerabilities, but generally speaking, we see a lot of perpetrators or people who cause harm who will use a victim's mental health. They'll threaten that the children will be taken away because they'll get social services involved, and actually, you're the crazy one and no one's going to believe you, and you've got no evidence as well. That's a really big thing. So
all of this is so hard to to evidence.
Absolutely.
How could you evidence it?
Yeah, completely. So for a victim, they doubt themselves massively. Obviously, their self-esteem has disappeared, all of those things. So it's kind of, for a person causing harm, it's like a perfect storm, if you like. And they'll play on certain things. So if they earn quite a good wage, they'll play on the financial side of things. Oh, well, you know, I'm not going to give you any money, you'll have nothing, how will you survive? They could have intimate images and videos as well, and they could be it wouldn't even necessarily be a direct threat that something would be done with those to upload maybe onto a public site, but the victim will feel vulnerable to that, because by you know, once this is established, once we've got coercive control in this relationship, the victim will know that actually that person is capable of most things. So the vulnerable sides, the things that person has over them, it doesn't have to be directly, clearly blackmailed, but that threat is still there, and it's a very real threat as well. It's quite paralyzing for our victims. They just want to survive, and not really come outside of that, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Because quite often they would have been isolated to a point where they don't know what the system is, and if they're being told that social services are going to come and take their children. Unfortunately, things like EastEnders don't do us any favours in when they do portray these kind of storylines. It is that the police are knocking on the door and taking the children immediately because of one report that's come through. And so when someone is only exposed to that kind of coverage and they don't know all the ins and outs, they've been isolated from support services and everything, so that people aren't able to reassure them around the processes and things, it can be terrifying. And it's so effective, isn't it? And I think coming back to that whole thing around evidencing stuff, what we're trying to evidence, if we're trying to evidence for coercive control, we're needing to show evidence of intention.
Yeah.
Because again, coming back to when these behaviours are so subtle, so gradual, so normalised and part of the relationship, that if we were to look at them individually, we could all possibly say that they're like you say, tracking, who tracks their kids or partner, to know when they're coming home from work or school or wherever. And that can be part of a normal way of life. I quite often speak to my partner of, what have you been up to today? Where have you been? Who have you been working with? Not because I want to know, not because I want to know from a coercive control point of view, but you can see how there's a flip side to all of them. So really, when we're thinking about reporting and evidencing things and evidencing coercive control, how do we evidence intention?
Absolutely.
And again, with them being normalized and these individual instances, someone in this is just surviving. They're not making a mental note of a list of all of these incidents. They're just living one, surviving it, living the next one, surviving it. So when you come to unpick it, it can take years. When we sit with people, we could be sort of like 8 to 12 months in to supporting someone, and they'll still come in the next week and go, oh, and I've just realized that this happened as well. It takes such a long time to unpick.
It really does. And I had a client who, as an example, was in a really, really high risk relationship with someone who was very, very volatile, but he was aware that her father had had an affair. And for her, that was enough of a reason. He posed a significant risk to her, to the children. He'd had her and him in the car, and he'd driven in the car at 120 miles an hour and threatened to crash it into a tree. He was absolutely heading in a very, very scary direction with his behaviour. But she was paralysed because her only support network were her parents, and she knew that he posed a risk to that, because if he'd have said what he knew, it would have blown all of that out of the water. So for her, she was completely stuck. And that's just an example, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
We hear it all the time. It's very common.
Yeah.
So next one. So making threats. Now, again, it's not probably what you would see in the movies, where it's a really clear threat that's nicely typed out in a message that we can screenshot and evidence. And
they never message. They will always call.
Absolutely,
always
absolutely.
Call.
And I think that it isn't even necessarily a direct threat, but it can be. It can get to the stage where actually perpetrators they're like a monster that gets fed, and all of this behavior, all of this control feeds the monster, and then they become very brazen sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
So it can be threats to harm, It can be threats to harm others, physically or emotionally. So again, thinking of that example of the chap that knew about the affair, you know, he knew the kind of damage that would do, so that was enough. It can be threats to take away children, to take them abroad as well. That's another common thing. So we often check about where passports are and who's got that kind of in their possession. I think, you know, we've already mentioned children, haven't we? For a victim, their children are their reason to survive. Okay, if there aren't children in that dynamic, often it's pets. So threats to harm a pet. I mean, I was told once of a really great example, and this will always stick in my mind for obvious reasons, because this lady had a pet turkey, and she lived for this turkey. Now we have there's pets refuge for pets, isn't there? So they will take dogs and cats. Generally speaking, there isn't support necessarily for a pet turkey. She knew that he would kill that animal if she left. It was the only reason she got up out of bed in the morning. It was her lifeline. So crazy though it sounds, that's what happens when you're in a traumatic situation. You for survival, you cling to something, and animals are a huge part of that. We hear it a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
So the threats to harm something around that victim, the perpetrator will know the kind of impact that will have. And again, that's hard to evidence. It's hard to measure, but we know that would absolutely destroy the victim, which gives that person then that complete power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just consider for yourself, if you were in that scenario and if you have any pets or children that, you know, that you could imagine yourself being in that scenario for, because it's just devastating to even consider, isn't it, really? And things again like the silent threats. So again, how do you evidence so a person causing harm leaving weapons around for their victim to find when dropping off children for contact, for example. You know, they're leaving that weapon around. From a domestic abuse standpoint, we know what that means. That's a very clear threat of, I have this weapon and I can use it. If you don't stay in line, I'll either use it on you or the children / pets. But again, for evidencing, you go to the police and say, oh, when I dropped my kids off this morning, that person had a weapon around, you know, well, it's in the home. Did they say that they were going to do anything with it? No. Did they threaten you in any way? Not verbally. So it's again thinking about things like that when we're thinking about coercive control, that coercive element, there's not quite often not the verbal, you know, it's not often very direct and obvious, but for somebody who's lived with this person, they will know what that means. And so we always believe, as soon as someone comes through our doors and they say, well, this is happening, but you know, no one believes me because, you know, this hasn't happened or this hasn't happened. We get it. We totally get it because of this model.
And Devon actually as well is a really interesting county. So statistically, and like Jess has said, it's really important to make sure that we acknowledge we support male victims and female victims. Statistically in Devon, compared to national averages, you're more likely to be a female victim. And also we have a very, very high level of gun licenses across Devon, and we have to take that seriously. And unfortunately, you know, for some people, even, you know, judges in courtrooms, they may own weapons, they may have a gun license, and they may not see an issue with that. For us as IDVAs, as soon as there are weapons involved, license or no license, it's always a cause for concern with us. And I think that's really important, isn't it, to make sure that we don't have our own bias of like, oh well, I go out shooting, so it's okay. It's not okay. It's always a concern. We have to be really mindful of that.
Yeah, definitely.
So next one, journalistic code. So this is really interesting, this one. So again, it's like a little bit of that rule book, but it will be kind of executed in a way where we're thinking about controlling somebody's clothing, checking their phone, limiting their internet access. You know, the old school friend that you've known for years and you message every now and then, that will be questioned. There'll be restrictions. There might be restrictions on the makeup you wear or where you have your where you have your hair done. Limiting friendships, and especially friendships with men, so male colleagues and old friends from school and stuff like that. Thinking about your routine. So where you may go to have your hair done, or where you may go to meet with your friends for a coffee on a Saturday morning, all of that will again, it comes in gradually, but there will be certain rules as part of a loyalty code to that abusive person. So it's all a test about how much a victim will tolerate. It could be that they start to say, well, why don't you switch gyms? Don't go to that gym, go to my gym, and then I can give you a lift there. Or, don't go with that friend to that event, let me take you to this. And it will come in gradually. And each time it is that little bit of a test to see how much that victim will adapt and will change, and positively thinking, this is a great relationship. We've got so much in common. And there's more and more sort of dedication and time and change made by the victim to adapt to that perpetrator. And it really is that gradual introduction as well. It can be really subtle, oh, I prefer you in jeans, you look great in that long dress, don't wear the short one. I mean, these are kind of stereotypical examples, but it really is that drip feed. And it can be very, very subtle to start with, which is why it's so difficult for victims to identify. Yeah. And again, it's about that curiosity. And if you're having those conversations, I think questioning it for the victim. What do you think the intention is there? Do you think that's because they love you, or do you think that's because they're trying to control you? And you start to see the realization, don't you? And it's really important that we empower our victims to see the things for themselves and to realize things for themselves. So those questions, I think, are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And this really ties in with those other things around, again, when we're thinking about coercive control, we're not thinking that somebody is saying you are not allowed to wear that, you have to wear this. So when we ask the question on the risk assessment, it's so sort of like just set of does your partner control what you do, what you wear, who you see? And 9 times out of 10 we get the answer no, they've never told me that I can't do this, or I can't go there, or I can't wear that. But as Sophie said, that drip feed of information that's so gradual over time and takes so much unpicking when out of it, of thinking about that loss of our sense of self and our sense of identity that can creep in over time. If we're wearing certain things and our partner is then saying, oh, I loved it when you wore the other thing the other day. Oh, I mean, that looks nice, but, I really loved it when you wore that other thing. That's a little drip feed of, oh, okay, oh, maybe I don't look as good in this, so maybe next time I'm going to wear that. Realistically, we want our partners to find us attractive. That's the whole point of us being in a romantic, intimate relationship, is that we have that attraction there, that mutual attraction there. And if over time our partner is, oh, you look so lovely without any makeup on, oh, you're just so naturally beautiful. If I was to go and tell a friend that my partner's just told me I'm naturally beautiful and don't need makeup, she's going to go, lucky you, my goodness. But if we've got that sense, that awareness of that coercive control, this is beyond my partner giving me a nice compliment. It is them starting that drip feed of information that I shouldn't wear makeup. And over time, I'm being coerced into not wearing makeup, because although I'm choosing each day to not put makeup on, I'm doing it because if I put makeup on, my partner pulls a bit of a funny face at me and says that they prefer it when I don't. That kind of thing.
It's managing all the time. You're managing somebody else's reaction to things, and again, we keep saying it, but it's part of a pattern. It's part of a bigger picture. So all these, yeah, completely, and all these tiny Lego bricks, if you like, that on their own as isolated instances maybe seem insignificant, they are building a picture. And when you're the victim in that picture, it's very hard to come out of it and see what's going on from a fuller kind of perspective, and that's really dangerous.
Okay, so economic abuse, again, this one we will have, we're just waiting on dates to be confirmed, economic abuse webinar. So again, that one really deserves time to explore, because that's a big one, and just covers so much. So I would encourage you to keep an eye on the website that we will have the QR code for, to see when that date comes out, because that one will be a really good one. And again, not wanting to take away, but economic abuse, we're considering things like financial abuse, but it kind of goes delves a lot deeper, but certainly forms a big part of that coercive control umbrella. Okay, violence and intimidation. Oh no, I've gone too far. Violence and intimidation. So we might think automatically here, sort of the different forms of physical abuse and intimidation that we might, associate with domestic abuse. But violence and intimidation certainly doesn't have to include any kind of physical violence. So body language makes up 55% of our communication, and our victims in these scenarios will be very attuned to the look, hand gestures, all of that kind of the body language changes that can happen with a person causing harm right at the time when you kind of, your heart drops that, okay, they're not happy. I've done something, I've said something, or I've not done something right. And quite often in these cases, again, thinking about the kind of display of coercive control is that the person causing harm here doesn't actually need to use any verbal communication here. We know that already with a lot of these different forms. Oh, I've just seen. Are the slides moving on okay for everybody?
Yeah, they are for me. We've got the umbrella with the all the different things that you're talking about popping up.
Fab, thank you. Okay, good. I just had a panic then. Hopefully it sorts for you, Jo. Yeah, so we know from a lot more of these behaviours that the verbal communication doesn't have to be a thing. So we're thinking about the look, the hand gestures, things like smashing of things, smashing of belongings, quite often the victim's belongings, also quite often while they're in the same room, but not necessarily. If we're thinking about the kind of silent threat element, our victim might be slightly late coming home from somewhere and they get home to their belongings smashed around the house, and maybe the person causing harm is no longer home, so that just adds to that element of anxiety around, oh my god, what have I done wrong? They're really angry with me now and I don't know where they are or what they're thinking or what they're feeling. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
And for a perpetrator, what they want is compliance.
Yeah.
So often as well, you won't necessarily see the explosive kind of on the movie type of behaviour that we see on the telly, because actually they've achieved that through those threats, through those looks, through the kind of, this is a potential, that's a potential, maybe you've experienced it before as a victim, or you've seen them in a pub in a fight or something. You'll know that they are capable of absolutely exploding. So it's all the time, isn't it, about kind of managing that, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it kind of really ties in nicely with that threat element of, things like hitting walls. Quite often it'll be hitting the wall next to the victim's face. And again, that sends a very clear message, a very clear threat that today it's the wall, tomorrow it could be you. But yeah, ultimately, if you are a victim in this scenario, whatever it is that you have done or not done, you're not going to do it again.
Absolutely.
And that is where the physical element doesn't have to come in. Quite often the physical element isn't needed because that kind of lower level violence and intimidation is enough to gain that compliance. Just a threat that the violence could occur, the physical violence could occur, is enough to keep somebody compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this one here we are looking at isolation. So we have touched on this because what you've probably gathered from all of these kind of mini topics within the coercive control umbrella is actually a lot of them linked together. So this is linked to the loyalty code. It's all about kind of diminishing a support network that can be colleagues, family, friends. Frequent moving is another one. So we'll get onto this in a minute, but actually a trigger for perpetrators is that they really struggle to hold or maintain a job. So it could be that they have to move for work reasons. It could be that they're in the military. It could just be that they every few years they move because they're keeping that victim kind of on their toes and not really settled anywhere. Living in a remote location. Somebody's popped a thing in the chat about rural domestic abuse. Absolutely, it's a huge topic in itself. So being isolated with lack of internet, a lack of phone signal. It could be that we're supporting somebody that has to walk for 2 hours up to the top of a hill, and they can only do that every 2 weeks to get phone signal to be able to answer a text message to us. Literally, we are dealing with this kind of thing. So that's really important to remember the geography, if you like, of what Devon is like as a county. I think it's also really important to mention cultural isolation, language barriers as well. That's really significant, and something that we see often is that somebody doesn't speak English as a first language. And we have to be really mindful of that. And that doesn't come with stereotypes and assumptions, but actually what we want is for everybody to be able to access support if they need it. So we need to make sure that that's really clear and delivered as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a family years ago in refuge who had fled to England for safety, and the person causing harm had his own access to enough funds to support the family, and that was why they were then allowed to stay. But he isolated her to the point where she didn't know what support was out there. She didn't feel that there was any support out there for what she was experiencing, her and the children. She didn't know that there was anything out there because he just kept her so isolated and sort of didn't allow her to find out really what was going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we've got routines and rituals. So what we're thinking about here when we think about routines and rituals is, again, that normal part of family life that we could probably all relate to in some sense, in that typically we probably all get up around the same sort of time, and we have the same sort of morning routine. We go off and we do whatever we're doing for the day. Any children might go to school or nursery, and then when we come home in the evening, what does that routine look like? And it's very much the same here. But again, thinking about what makes it coercive control, that intention around behaviour, and what a person causing harm who is wanting to be controlling in this scenario is saying is that there is to be no deviation from the rules. So they typically will set these rules of how they like things to be done, in what order, and even down to the littlest details, such as the cup that they drink from, the types of meals that they eat, all of those kind of things, and what time they have dinner, where they eat, all of those kind of things. And when there are any kind of deviations to that, so I don't know, the favorite cup gets smashed accidentally, or the dinner gets burnt or anything, it really sounds really out there and not realistic, but it really does happen. The consequences of this can be huge, and can really lead to, that violence and intimidation. It can escalate things. And again, this is when we hear our victim in this scenario taking responsibility. Oh, well, I knew I got it wrong, and I knew that they didn't like that, and I knew that, so I created that, I caused this. And that can be huge. I'm conscious of time, and we want to definitely do the next slide. So you can see here from this slide how much is going on under this umbrella. It's a huge amount, and in all of these different bits there will be a multitude of behaviours within that as well. And this could be one person experiencing all of this within their life. And again, hopefully from how we've explained it, we will have explained it in a way that our victim in this scenario quite often will feel that a lot of this is normalised, or is their fault, or they're doing, or not abusive in any kind of way. So when somebody's experiencing this, to even know that they could come and seek support and help, they might not even realise it. And that's a big part of what we aim to do as part of our work, is to really get the message out there, and raise awareness around the different forms of abuse, what it can look like, so that hopefully if there is anybody sitting with any of this stuff, it might resonate, and then they might feel, actually, I could do with a conversation, and then that's when we can start the unpicking work.
Okay, I'll be really quick with this one because I know we're time conscious, but I do want to just run through it really quickly. This is a model that's called the homicide timeline. It's 8 stages, and what's really significant is that the first 2 stages are before the relationships. Well, the first stage certainly is before the relationship starts. So we're looking at a previous history of abuse. We have access to things like Clare's law disclosures, but we also take into consideration rumours. If a perpetrator is saying, oh, I don't have access to my children, my partner took them away, or this is my crazy ex, all of that for us as practitioners is a red flag. So that previous history of abuse is really significant. The relationship will start, it will start to develop very, very quickly. That speed is really significant because that's how an abusive person works. They have to have that speed. They can't do slow time. So something will happen. There'll be big commitments, pregnancy, moving in together, relocating, getting engaged, getting married. Something will happen really quickly. What then will start to happen is that the coercive control will dominate. There'll be covert behaviours, overt behaviours, but as we've covered today, hopefully you've got a better understanding of that. It can be many of those behaviours, it can be specific parts of what we've talked about today, but it certainly becomes established very quickly. Then there'll be a trigger that threatens the perpetrator's dominance. Okay, that from this study that this was developed from, actually that trigger can be them losing their job. Okay, there's very strong links between the two there. The relationship will end. So the victim can turn around and say, do you know what, I've had enough of this, I'm leaving you, it's over. Then we see an escalation in that perpetrator's behaviour. That's really, really important, because what happens is that their sense of control and power has been completely challenged, and it's their reaction to that that's really important. We start to see tracking devices, stalking, lots of use of technology, threatening suicide, very, very chaotic behaviour that's all designed to get that victim back under their control. So it's like they're just throwing anything out there to see what sticks. Then we can see a change in a perpetrator's behaviour. Suddenly they are better. They are not stalking, calling, messaging. They're not harassing. They're not so bothered about whether they have this weekend or that weekend with the kids. It will seem better. For the victim, they just think, oh, thank God, everything's okay. It's fixed, you know, he's moved on or she's moved on or whatever. But actually that perpetrator potentially is changing their tactic. And it can be at this stage that the victim thinks everything's fine and they go back into the relationship thinking it's all fixed. Often it's not. We know all about the cycle of abuse. What then will start to happen is that a perpetrator will start planning things. They will realise the relationship is over, they don't have that control and they can't handle it. So we might see gathering of weapons, researching how to dispose of a body, how to kill somebody. And stage 8 is homicide. I know that a lot of you are messaging saying you've got to go, so that I will leave it there, but it's really clearly laid out, and we will send out a handout with lots of this information on for you.
Yeah. That brings us to the end. Thank you so much for being with us. We do have some time for questions if anybody has any, but feel free to go if you need to. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Katie, you've got your hand up.
You're on mute, Katie.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
We
Yes, can hear you.
Are
Yeah.
the perpetrators aware that they're